Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to discuss the juicy bits for Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. Of course, the sequel to Human Revolution, which was the reboot of the legendary Deus Ex franchise, one of the games that spawned the first-person shooter RPG genre. Human Revolution was an outstanding experience. There's no doubt about that. I love that game to death, and I'm happy to say that Mankind Divided is really damn good too. It's more Deus Ex in terms of the Deus Ex that was defined or redefined with the launch of Human Revolution. It really is everything that you loved about Human Revolution expanded. So they took like all the core ideas that were created in Human Revolution and they spidered them out. They put more detail into them. They added some cool little features into the game. In some ways actually restricting the player a little bit more, in some ways expanding what the player could do. They really just tried to make a better experience, and I think in a lot of ways they succeeded in doing just that. Now I want to briefly talk about performance issues, just make everybody aware of performance issues. It seems like it's kind of all over the place. Game's running great for some people, they're running not so great for other people. There are people with high-end systems that it's running poorly for. There are people like myself who have a really outdated 3 GB GPU that I'm running the game with pretty much no issue, exactly where I should be on medium settings with about 50 to 60 FPS with occasional frame drops. So do yourself a favor, if you're going to pick the game up on PC, do your due diligence, do some research, look around on the forums, see what types of performance people are getting with a similar rig to yours. Of course, remember that if you buy it on Steam and just want to figure it out for yourself, you have 2 hours of playtime allowed before you can no longer refund the game, so keep that in mind. And that's all I'm going to say about that. There's plenty of other YouTube videos out there, I'm sure, breaking down the performance for the game. I want to talk about Mankind Divided. I want to talk about this wonderful, juicy experience that I have not been able to put down for the last 12 hours. Now, I should point out, guys, that I'm just bringing you my first impressions for the story. We're going to talk about Breach, which is the game's arcade mode, a standalone mode, on another day, hopefully in the coming days, as I have not really got to spend much time with that. So, same great Deus Ex, right? I think that's kind of the nature, you know, the core of Mankind Divided. It is very much the Deus Ex experience you've come to love and know from Human Revolution. First-person shooter, third-person cover mechanic, lots of player choice. You can go stealth, you can go loud. You've got cool augmentations to add to the gameplay experience. You've got a great RPG story with discussion mechanics. All of that stuff exists. It's just been expanded. So the question is, where do we start? What do we talk about first? Let's actually talk about Jensen's augmentations, and we'll also talk about the gadgets and gear. So guns, gear, and gadgets, and how that's all evolved and been improved here in Mankind Divided. So, as Adam Jensen, you know, continuing the story, I'm not going to really talk too much about what's happened since the events of Human Revolution. You have your augmentations. You have a lot of the augmentations that existed in the first game. You've got some returning ones. They've tweaked some of the returning augmentations. They've made them function a little bit differently. All in all, there seems to be a lot more augmentations than what we had in the first game, and you're definitely going to have access to a lot more by the time the game wraps up, I imagine. But there's also been a super secret set of augmentations that you're going to get your hands on very early in the game. These augmentations require you to make some pretty difficult decisions, and this is where some of those restrictive player elements come into play with Mankind Divided. And I actually like this. You know, there's a couple ways which they really restrict the player in terms of, you know, the types of decisions they're going to be able to make and the impact those decisions are going to have on other ways they could potentially play the game. So there's this small set of augmentations that you can equip, you can buy with Praxis points just like you could previously, but in doing so you're going to actually end up overheating your augmented core. So to prevent you from basically killing yourself, you have to permanently deactivate one of your standard augmentations. So you can take on one or multiple of these new augmentations, but every time you do so, you're going to have to deactivate one of those old augmentations. That's the experience early game, you know, for the first 12 hours. I don't really know what happens after that. I know there's some stuff going on in the story that has allowed me to gain access to a certain piece of equipment that could potentially help me out. But right now, in this first 12 hours, which is a lot of time, there's a lot of side missions, there's a couple main story missions, I'm having to balance and weigh my options. You know, so for example, I went with this new Icarus Dash ability. The augmentation that I decided to give up was the spotting and marking augmentation. I felt that that wasn't completely necessary, doesn't really fit my playstyle, I'm not worried about it, so I permanently deactivated it. Now the cool thing about this, and this ties directly into how you want to play the game, is that the player can't really be a full-on jack of all trades. This is something that I have a really big pet peeve with when it comes to a lot of stealth games recently. Splinter Cell became notorious for this. As much as I loved Blacklist and Conviction, it became a game where the player could constantly play the game in any given way. And a lot of people would say that's a positive, but I like being restricted in terms of the decisions that I try to make. So what I'm basically saying in Deus Ex is that if you build an Adam Jensen that is more focused on stealth abilities, that has more augmentations that focus on stealth at the cost of deactivating augmentations, say, that increase armor or increase recoil or weapon handling, then you're going to be really good at stealth, but you're going to be not so good in full-on combat situations. That's the sacrifice you have to make for being an amazing stealth-built Adam Jensen, and vice versa. If I build an Adam Jensen that's all about combat, that has crazy dermal armor, then I shouldn't be able to perform as well in stealth situations. I think that's a perfectly fair trade-off. It adds replayability. It gives the player a reason to go back a second or third time and play the game in a different way. And it also forces you to specialize. You know, this is what you want to do. You want to be a stealth player. Well, you know, how far do you want to take it? How good do you want to be at stealth? And at what cost to run and gun into the more aggressive play style, you know, is that going to be for you? I really like that. I like that type of decision. And it's exactly what the new augmentations do. Now, on top of those new augmentations, as I said, we also, of course, have all of our gear and guns and gadgets. So when it comes to gunplay, they've pretty much completely revamped the old system. We still have the upgrade system that existed in Human Revolution, but it functions much differently now. Rather than just buying upgrade kits that increase the damage of a weapon or something like that, you can actually spend crafting resources to upgrade individual stats on your weapons. So for example, I can have a 10mm pistol and I can increase its fire rate, I can increase its magazine capacity and its accuracy by spending these crafting materials. On top of that, you can find attachments like suppressors and laser sights. You also have alternative ammunition in the form of stun rounds. So all of the projectile lethal weapons can have stun rounds that can be used to deactivate certain electronic devices or even shut down something like an exosuit on a patrol unit. This is super useful even for someone who plays non-lethal like myself. There are times when you need a lethal solution with an alternative ammunition round in order to take a non-lethal approach. That's exactly what those exo guys are all about. You still have your slew of non-lethal options, of course, takedowns. You also have your tranquilizer rifle, and you also have a stun pistol. So there are plenty of opportunities to do your no-kill playthrough, which is what I'm going with right now. I haven't killed anyone yet. Purely, I've been doing non-lethal takedowns and using, stun and stuff like that. And I think it's more satisfying this time around. I felt in Human Revolution that the non-lethal route was often frustrating rather than difficult and enjoyable. And you know, I just felt like I was limited in ways I shouldn't have been limited when it came to enemy engagements because of the way they've refined the augmentations and a lot of the weapon systems. Like I said, you have that opportunity to mix and match. There are often situations where lethal weapons like the 10mm pistol with the stun darts are going to be useful. You know, I like that variety that seems built into the gunplay now. And, of course, what this means for people who actually want to play lethal is that they have a massive amount of options now for how they expand their lethal arsenal to become really, really deadly and effective. This is something that I felt did not exist in Human Revolution. It was a weak spot in the game. You pretty much just shot people in the face. There are so many more enemy types you're going to have to deal with. There are armor plating. You know, there are all these different obstacles in your way, and they've given you an additional set of tools to combat those obstacles with for those of you who want to go lethal. As much as I don't like what the outcome of a lethal playthrough would be, which is why I haven't chosen to do it for my first playthrough, I'm excited to go back and do a lethal playthrough because I have a feeling it's going to be quite badass. Now, apart from guns and augs, we have the gadgets. So there's some hacking gadgets now. There are actually additional layers to the hacking system itself. So rather than just being able to like shut down firewalls and some of the nukes, they've got like a worm slow, they've got a stealth hack module that you can find. All these things can basically just be scavenged out in the environment. And of course we have that wonderful old school grid-based inventory system, so you can play inventory Tetris all day long. The game does have an auto inventory management system, but I strongly suggest you turn that off, because that's one of the sublime, relaxing pieces of enjoyment in life, is organizing your inventory. It should be boring as hell, but for some reason it's absolutely not, and I really truly dig that. So as you can see, a lot of the core elements that were created in Human Revolution exist in Mankind Divided. They've just been expanded. They've been improved on. We've got more ways to upgrade your gear, more ways to upgrade your guns. You have a crafting system, not just for your weapons, but you can also, like I said, you can craft little modules to make hacking easier. You can craft med kits, and you can also craft your energy stims. So this is a returning part of the game that some people are going to love, some people are going to hate. You have an actual battery for your exosuit. So much like the first game, you can't just use all of your abilities infinitely. And this goes across everything. So for example, I have a cloaking device built into my augmentations. I really like using this for stealth. It's a great way to clear larger gaps that I would not be able to clear otherwise, but it drains your battery heavily, which means when you get to the other side of said gap, you have to be prepared to deal with whatever situation might arise with no battery or low battery. I won't be able to do a non-lethal or lethal takedown, so I'll have to make sure I have a stun pistol out. It's another restrictive element that has been put on the player that, to me, improves the overall satisfaction of the gameplay. If there was no battery system, you could pretty much just go all willy-nilly and cloak for days and use all these crazy takedowns. It forces you to really think about your execution from point A to point B to point C to the finish of the game. How do I deal with the obstacles from point A to point B, and so on and so forth? I like that. It's an additional layer of thinking. And I think it's a big part of making Deus Ex a really great RPG FPS, not just an FPS with some RPG elements thrown in. There's a lot of player thought that goes into each and every mission in each and every situation that you deal with because of that battery level. Now, that battery level can be upgraded. You can improve the recharge rate. I've actually upgraded mine quite a bit. It still is something you have to manage. You're never really going to get to the point where it's infinite, and I really appreciate that, because the big thing is, as you go throughout the game, as you get into the 10, 12, 13, 14, 20 hour mark, you start to unlock more expensive augmentations, which means you use more battery. So it all kind of balances out, and I really do dig the way they've handled that. Now, we're on the topic of that inventory system. We talked about the inventory management system being decidedly old school. I want to talk about some of the negatives before we move forward, because there are a few irritations that exist in Mankind Divided that existed in Human Revolution. The thing about Human Revolution and Mankind Divided is that while they are great RPG FPSs, they feel in some areas decidedly retro and old school. Sometimes this is okay. I'm okay with the inventory management system. Sometimes it's just an irritating nuisance that should definitely be replaced. The game has an excessive lack of context-sensitive player interactions. So walking up the tiniest of ledges to get through a windowsill perhaps requires you to jump and crouch at the same time. Like I said, it feels old school. Like the developers forgot that they could animate that sort of thing and have it happen automatically. You have to press a button to get on every single ladder and to jump onto every single ledge. It feels rough. It feels old school. Like, I feel like we've gotten away from that, and context, sensitive based engagements with the player and the environment have become more and more prominent in game design for a lot of good reasons. Like I said, the lack of these in Deus Ex can be at times frustrating. There's nothing worse than when you're in a really cool stealth situation and then you find yourself mashing the A button 10 times trying to jump over a tiny piece of pipe that's on the ground because the character won't automatically walk over it. It's like, what? Why? So small things like that exist. They're frustrating, but I can definitely overlook them because of the rest of the game. It's such a well-crafted experience otherwise that those things can be overlooked, but it just makes the game feel a little less smooth, and you lose some of that badass feel, like I said, when you're in the middle of stealthing and all of a sudden your character can't walk over a 3-inch piece of lead pipe on the ground. So let's move forward. Let's talk about some of the other RPG elements. You know, we talked about inventory and augmentations and all that cool stuff. But of course, one of the biggest things about Deus Ex is the conversation system, the ability to persuade people one way or another in conversation to doing your will, to listening to you, or to agreeing with you, or maybe to letting you, gain access to a certain piece of equipment. This was always a big part of the game's single player in Human Revolution, and it often tied into some of the side quest stuff. It's way more expanded into the game now, though. There are a lot of side quests that you go out and do that feel like full-fledged missions in the main story because they've really taken the time to build characters for you to have conversations with. And the conversations now, in many cases, are just an additional player choice. For example, one of the early side missions that you can pick up with this sort of gangster thug to retrieve a certain component for a certain character who I won't talk about, can be completed in multiple ways. So you can actually find a back door, which you can get into if you have the strength requirements in your augmentations, in which case you can then stealth, or, you could go ahead and go loud and basically kill everyone for this. Or you could just walk through the front door and have a full-fledged conversation with basically the godfather of Prague. Not something I expected, but when it triggered and when it happened, I was pleasantly surprised, because in my mind, I had tried the backdoor entry. I was like, okay, I don't have the AUG status for that. Let's just go into the front door, and worst comes to worst, I'm going to go guns blazing. If I can't stealth, I'm just going to kill them. They're gangsters, they're bad people. I won't really feel any remorse about that. That was my personal moral decision. Lo and behold, I open the door, and the guy's like, hey, we have an honest police officer. And this wonderful conversation breaks out. And at the end of the day, I end up making a deal with the devil in one way or another. But I get what I wanted, and I didn't have to kill anyone, and I'm not really, at odds with those people. Super cool. To see that happen in a side mission, I think really shows you just how much effort they put into the discussion and the conversation elements of the game. I've actually spent so much time in the game talking to people, possibly more time talking to people than I've spent actually shooting people, and I like that. I like that. It makes combat really enjoyable when it does happen, and it's a nice way of setting a great, the game has great pacing because of it, is the best way to say it. You're not just constantly going from combat mission to combat mission to combat mission. There's so much conversation, there are so many discussion pieces, there's so much talking people down and gathering intel. It just makes it feel like a really great little cyberpunk experience because of that, in a little bit more grounded in reality. I wouldn't say Deus Ex is full cyberpunk, but it just feels good. The pacing in the game is perfecto because of that. I really, really dig that. And they've also enhanced the conversation system, its core. Like I said, it's more expanded. I think it's easier to use the conversation, the social augmentation, to figure out what people want to hear, basically, to get your responses. I always felt like it was difficult to do that in Human Revolution. That system never fully made sense to me. It makes more sense now. You get some wonderful background and detail about the person and their personality and the type of conversation that they will respond best to. It just makes it easier to have an outcome that's more based around the outcome that you want to have. It feels less like guessing and more like, this is how I want to interact with this person. There's the information I need, so this is how I'm going to talk with them. Whether that's a negative manner, or whether you want to blow this person off and piss them off because you want to go lethal, or whether or not you want to persuade them because you want to stay calm and positive. It just feels more controlled by the player, and that's a big positive to me. So, of course, all of this game takes place in a wonderful new set of missions and world design. We've got a new hub in the form of Prague. It's got multiple little segments. It's an improvement over what was in Human Revolution. There's no denying that. But I don't think it's quite there. The thing is, I think it's inherently difficult to build hubs for a game like this. When you don't have a fully open world experience, and then you have to build something that is open world that also tries to portray a sense of a larger scale, that's not an easy thing to do. And as much as I like what they've done with the hub in Prague, it feels more alive. Talking with citizens is a really big part of the game. You can talk with the police. You can get a feel for each and every person's, sort of where they stand when it comes to the whole situation between augmented and non-augmented people. And it's pretty cool to go to one part of Prague, see where augmented people aren't really allowed, and have 99% of the people there bash you. Like, you're genuinely in an area where they hate augmented people, and you see that response. And then you go to an area where, you walk into a human and non-augmented person, and they speak really positively, like, oh, I'm super pro-aug. it's just cool. It's a really interesting piece of interaction, you know, to essentially take on the role of somebody who's at the center of, you know, a lot of prejudices. It's a weird feeling to have that in a video game, but I think they handled it really well. Outside of that, you know, it looks cool. The hub looks beautiful. I think they tried to capture some of the architecture of, you know, Prague. Prague is known for being an incredibly beautiful city. I don't think they quite captured the scale. That's the biggest issue that I have. You know, the hub is bigger than what we saw in Human Revolution. Don't get me wrong, but that sense of scale, the sense of like I'm in one small portion of a much larger city, they didn't do that for me, and that definitely detracts from my, you know, sort of immersion or my emotional connection to that particular area. It just didn't do it for me. As beautiful as it is, it reminds me actually a lot of City 17 and Half-Life 2. You know, in terms of its design aesthetic, I just, for some reason, I'm like, am I in City 17? I'm like waiting for Striders to come over the top of the thing. You know, it feels old school, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm saying that it reminds me of a piece of game design from over, you know, a decade ago at this point. That's exactly how I feel about it. It's not perfect, but it is much better than what we had in Human Revolution, and it's the breeding ground for a lot of your side quests. It's a great place to explore as well. You know, while it does feel old school, there are plenty of avenues of exploration, and it's important that you take those avenues and that you explore, because often that's what will lead you to those stealth routes, those alternative routes. And the same can be said for a lot of the more direct main story stuff. You know, when you go to the different areas of the game world and you're in a more focused mission type area, they still keep it open world. You know, it's semi-open world. It's still like a hub. So there's like a hub for each and every mission. And there are side missions you can find within those hubs. You can, you know, you can talk to people. You can find different routes. You can find information to make completing a main objective, you know, easier or maybe even more difficult sometimes by owing somebody another favor. There's just a lot of option and a lot of variety in how you tackle each and every mission in the game. And that's really cool. It's definitely expanded over what was in Human Revolution, and it's just an absolute positive. It's executed well, it's satisfying, and it makes each and every mission area feel that much more alive. And like I said, if you know, it's more expansive. You have a lot more avenues for how you tackle these situations, much more than you had in Human Revolution. So the world design's pretty good, you know. Obviously the visual appearance of the game I, you know, find absolutely stunning. I think graphically it's beautiful. It makes me want to buy a new GPU sooner rather than later so I can run this game on Ultra. It is incredibly beautiful. I personally have an obsession with the idea of augmentations. I think Deus Ex portrays them in a fantastical and beautiful way. And you look at Adam Jensen's augmentations, you look at the augmentations of some of the people you run into in the game, and you know, I just look at that as that's gorgeous, that's stunning. And I think we're actually getting to that point in the real world, you know, where a lot of people who have prosthetics are realizing, like, I don't need to have a prosthetic that looks like a human limb, you know, to have it be beautiful, to allow me to feel comfortable and have an appreciation of it. I can have something that looks mechanical and handcrafted or 3D printed, and I can, you know, enjoy that, and I can be happy with that, and I can, you know, basically, you know, that becomes a part of their personal beauty. I think we're very much pushing towards that. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's an amazing thing. And I think we're at an outstanding point as human beings for people who are in that situation, who have lost limbs, to be able to live a life like anyone else. When you see the athletes with prosthetics and stuff like that, it's incredible. So super cool. Like I said, you know, I think Deus Ex portrays a part of what we will definitely see happen with us in terms of body augmentation, body modification, and prosthetics, and I think it does it in an absolutely beautiful way. It's a big part of the Deus Ex experience, and it's just as well presented in Mankind Divided as it was in Human Revolution. Now, I don't want to talk directly about the game's story. I don't want to give anything away or spoil anything for anyone, but I do want to talk about, you know, sort of how it's delivered. From the moment you boot up Mankind Divided, you're in a very emotional experience. The developers have done a lot to portray, you know, a sense of what's going on in this world. You know, the terror, the fear, the sadness, the despair, and all of these different emotions that are being felt by all of the different people involved in these situations. And then you have Adam Jensen, you know, and they're doing a lot to really show to the player, you know, how he is perceiving a lot of this, you know, this sorrow. And Jensen has inherently become someone who just wants the violence to stop. You know, he wants it all to come to an end, and he wants the people who triggered all of it to pay for it. So they're always doing it, you know, throughout cutscenes, you know, just things you find in the world, you know, like I said, the civilians you run into, the other augmented, the way the augmented are being treated by the police force. It's, there is constantly, you know, emotion being thrown in your face. It's all about how the player perceives that, you know, like, what do you think of it? How do you feel about it? And it's cool. You know, the game just sets it up, and it's, like I said, it's up to you as the individual to perceive that in whatever way you choose to perceive that. That to me was a huge part of the experience. It's an additive part of the experience. It's made my time with the game that much more enjoyable. It's been a hook for me. You know, it's a reason I want to keep playing. I want to get to the next thing. I want to see this through. I want to hunt down that resolution just as much as Adam Jensen does. Now, there's one small thing that drove me crazy about the game. You know, there's obviously a big push for, oh, you're going to make these decisions and these choices, and often you're going to have to choose between one side or the other, and this is going to affect the world around you. You're going to start to see that. But you can't actually directly affect the world on a smaller scale. So when you're in the Prague hub, you know, and you see the police bossing around augments, you can't step in. You know, you can't push them aside. You can't get involved. You have no way to interact with them on a more positive level. What you can do is pull out a gun and start killing everyone. And I think that's kind of sad that they really only give you that one way of interacting with these people. Like, I can pull out a gun, I can go on a mass killing spree, but I can't interact on a more positive level. There's no in between. It's like, okay, either pull out a gun and shoot this person, or that's it. Like, there's no influence. If I walk up to a police officer and pull out a shotgun inside of the game in the hub of Prague, there's nothing happens. No one says anything. No one's affected by that. And that's super weird. Like, something should happen. There, you know, the officer should say, put that away right now. You know, who do you think you're messing with? There's this weird detachment. You know, you can talk to somebody, they can tell you to move away, but in terms of direct social interaction, it only happens when the game wants it to happen. There's not a lot the player can do. I even threw a fire extinguisher at a dude in an exosuit, one of the officers, and he didn't say a word to me. It's weird. I feel like it's a missed opportunity to allow the player to interact with the world in those hubs on a smaller scale. All in all, though, Deus Ex Mankind Divided is an outstanding FPS RPG experience. One that definitely lives up to the Deus Ex name. One that lives up to what they did with the reboot with Human Revolution. I haven't got to the end of the game yet, so I don't know where we're going from here, but please, please don't make this the last piece of Deus Ex. I love this franchise so much, and I would love to see this game move forward, and I'd love to see them expand on this experience and go, you know, one step further. How can we make it, you know, how can we make it better? How can we improve? I think there's still room to do that, and I'd love to see that happen. My personal recommendation at the 12-hour mark that I've been playing the game now is, if you like Deus Ex, pick it up. If you like Human Revolution, pick it up. If you like RPG FPS games, pick it up. If you like games with excessive amounts of player choice, pick it up. Do yourself a favor if you grab it on PC. As I said, check out those performance issues. Make sure you pick up a game that you can actually run on your PC. If you have any other questions for me, any thoughts of your own, if you've been playing Mankind Divided, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Please keep them spoiler-free. It's okay to talk about gameplay and stuff like that, but leave out any of the story, as I imagine there are a lot of people who may have not gotten to where you are, myself included. I'm going to be taking a look at Breach, which is Deus Ex's arcade mode in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the juicy bits of Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and I will see you in the next one.
Plus, I do have other cases to work on too, Adam. I'll let you know when I find something.
You do that.
Take it easy.